The most dangerous people never raise their voices. They simply remember your face. I didn't know that truth when I clocked in for another Friday night at Bella Vista Trattoria on the Lower East Side. I was 26 years old, surviving on double shifts, reheated coffee, and the stubborn belief that tomorrow would finally be easier. Rain tapped against the front windows in soft rhythms that blurred the city lights into streaks of gold. The restaurant smelled like fresh basil, garlic, warm bread, and expensive wine. Most nights those scents comforted me. Tonight they felt strangely heavy. My name is Corinne Hale, and I had spent the last 4 years serving people who wore watches worth more than my car. Wealth never impressed me. Kindness always did. My grandmother used to laugh whenever I said that. She would stir tomato sauce with one hand and point her wooden spoon at me with the other. Money speaks loudly, she'd whisper in Sicilian. Character whispers forever. She came to America with one suitcase and an accent she never tried to lose. She also carried words from her tiny Sicilian village that almost nobody around us understood. She taught me those words like family recipes. I never imagined they could change my life. The dinner rush hit exactly at 7. Plates clattered. Glasses chimed together. Conversations blended into one steady wave of laughter and business deals. I balanced 3 entrees across my arms and smiled through aching feet that had already walked nearly 8 miles that day. My manager hurried past me carrying a reservation book against his chest. VIP table, he muttered. No mistakes tonight. I nodded without asking questions. VIP guests came every week. Celebrities, investors, politicians. They all expected perfection. None of them interested me very much. Then the front door opened. Cold air drifted inside with the rain. Every employee seemed to notice without anyone saying a word. 5 men entered together. Dark tailored suits. Calm expressions. Perfect posture. They didn't look loud or intimidating. They looked disciplined. The kind of men who never needed to prove anything. The man walking in the center caught my attention for reasons I couldn't explain. He looked about 34. Dark hair brushed neatly back. Pale eyes that never wandered. He moved slowly, yet everyone around him seemed to make room before he reached them. Confidence surrounded him like another tailored jacket. One of the bartenders quietly whispered, "That's Damien Vescari." The name meant nothing to me. I simply grabbed menus and walked toward their table. "Good evening," I said. "Welcome to Bella Vista." His eyes lifted from the candle burning between us. They met mine for less than a second. Somehow that single glance felt longer than entire conversations I'd had with other customers. He thanked me politely. His voice was low and measured. Not cold, just careful. I handed everyone their menus and recommended the seafood special. Damien listened without interrupting. He even thanked me again when I filled his water glass. Strange, I thought. Powerful men usually demanded attention. This one barely occupied space. As I turned away, another customer reached across the aisle and caught my wrist. "Hey," he slurred with a crooked grin. "You forgot my refill." His grip wasn't painful, but it was unwelcome. I calmly pulled my hand free and looked him straight in the eyes. "I'll bring it when I'm finished here." He rolled his eyes dramatically and muttered something under his breath. My patience disappeared before my professionalism could stop it. Under my breath, just loud enough for myself, I repeated one of my grandmother's oldest Sicilian insults. I smiled to myself, certain nobody in Manhattan would understand a forgotten village phrase. Then every sound inside the restaurant stopped. Even the rain outside seemed quieter. I slowly turned back toward the VIP table and found Damien Vescari already looking directly at me with the faintest smile I had ever seen. The smile never reached his eyes. That was what unsettled me most. It was calm, almost amused, as if he had been waiting years to hear those exact words. Nobody at the table touched their food. Nobody reached for a glass. Even the bartender froze with a bottle halfway through pouring a drink. I looked around, convinced I had imagined the silence. Then Damien leaned back in his chair with effortless composure. His fingers rested lightly against the stem of his wine glass. "Would you say that again?" he asked. His voice remained quiet. Everyone still heard it. I blinked. "Excuse me." His faint smile widened just enough to reveal genuine curiosity. "The phrase you just used." My stomach tightened. "I do not know what you mean." He tilted his head slightly. "You do." A nervous laugh escaped me before I could stop it. It was nothing. Nothing rarely stops an entire room. My manager suddenly appeared beside me. His face had turned almost white. "Corinne," He whispered urgently. Table 12 needs anything they ask for. I nodded without looking away from Damien. I was already helping them. My manager forced a nervous smile toward the table. Please forgive any misunderstanding. Damien calmly lifted one hand. There is no misunderstanding. The manager immediately fell silent. I had never seen anyone command attention without raising their voice. It should have frightened me. Instead, it irritated me. I crossed my arms carefully. If I accidentally offended you, I apologize. Damien slowly shook his head. You did not offend me. That answer surprised everyone, including the men seated beside him. One of them glanced toward Damien with obvious confusion before lowering his eyes again. Damien looked back at me. You pronounced every syllable perfectly. My heartbeat stumbled. What? That expression? He spoke several words in fluent Sicilian. The accent sounded natural, effortless, almost identical to my grandmother's. I forgot to breathe. Nobody outside my family had ever spoken that dialect to me. Not in New York. Not ever. Where did you learn that? I whispered before thinking. Damien did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied my face as though comparing it with an old memory. My question first, he said. Who taught you? Every instinct told me to end the conversation. My grandmother had always warned me that family stories belonged inside family walls. Just someone I loved? I answered carefully. Something flickered behind Damien's pale eyes. Recognition. Surprise. Maybe even hope. It disappeared almost instantly. Interesting, he murmured. I forced a polite smile. Now, if you will excuse me, other customers need their dinners. I turned before he could stop me. My hands were trembling as I reached the kitchen doors. The noise returned behind me all at once. Conversations restarted. Silverware clinked. Someone laughed too loudly. It felt as though the entire restaurant had been holding one collective breath. Inside the kitchen, I leaned against the stainless steel counter and exhaled slowly. My coworker Tessa stared at me with wide eyes. Do you even know who that guy is? She whispered. Apparently someone with very good hearing. She grabbed my arm. Corinne, that is Damien Vescari. I shrugged. Should that mean something? Her expression answered before her words did. People with money ask him for favors. People with power ask him for permission. I laughed uneasily. That sounds dramatic. I wish it was. Chef Lorenzo rang the service bell, breaking our conversation. More tickets spilled from the printer. Orders continued. Life moved forward, at least on the surface. I carried fresh plates back into the dining room, determined to treat table 12 exactly like every other customer. Yet every time I crossed the room, I could feel Damien's attention following me. Not aggressively, not possessively, curiously, like someone trying to solve a puzzle that refused to fit together. Near the end of the meal, I approached with dessert menus. Damien accepted his without looking at it. Instead, he quietly asked one final question. Is your grandmother still alive? The words landed harder than I expected. I swallowed before answering. No, she passed away 3 years ago. He lowered his eyes for the first time that evening. A silence settled between us that somehow felt heavier than before. When he finally looked back at me, the amusement had disappeared completely. I am sorry, he said. Those 3 words sounded genuine. Then he added softly, almost to himself, that means I am already too late. My pulse quickened. Too late for what? Before I could ask, one of the men beside him leaned close and quietly spoke a single sentence in Sicilian. Damien's expression changed instantly. Calm returned like a curtain falling into place. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and reached into his pocket. He placed something small beside the untouched dessert menu before walking toward the exit without another word. When I picked it up a minute later, my breath caught. It was an old Sicilian coin, worn smooth with age, and carved across one side was the exact symbol my grandmother had hidden inside a faded wooden jewelry box that nobody except our family had ever seen. I stared at the coin until Chef Lorenzo called my name for the 3rd time. The dinner rush had ended, but my thoughts refused to settle. The worn symbol carved into the metal matched the mark hidden inside my grandmother's old wooden jewelry box exactly. She had never explained its meaning. Whenever I asked, she would simply smile and say some stories arrived only when the right person knocked. I slipped the coin into my apron pocket before anyone noticed. The metal felt unexpectedly warm against my fingertips. Every few minutes I caught myself touching it, hoping it would somehow explain itself. It never did. Closing time came just after 11. The last customers drifted into the rainy streets, carrying umbrellas and leftovers. Chairs scraped across the hardwood floor as we prepared the dining room for tomorrow. Tessa walked beside me carrying a stack of clean glasses. "You have been quiet all night," she said. "That is unusual for you." I forced a smile. "Long shift." She laughed softly. "Do not lie to someone who has worked beside you for 2 years." I sighed. That man left me with more questions than answers. "Forget him. I am trying." She glanced toward the front entrance. "People like Damien Vescari live in another world." "Maybe. Definitely." She lowered her voice. "Just promise me you will not go looking for him." I nodded, even though I already knew curiosity had won. After we finished cleaning, I stepped outside into the cool night air. Rain still floated through the streetlights like silver threads. My old hatchback waited 2 blocks away beneath a flickering lamp. I zipped my jacket and started walking. The city sounded different after midnight. Fewer horns. More footsteps. More echoes. Halfway down the block, I heard an engine idling nearby. A black sedan rested along the curb with its headlights dimmed. I barely noticed it until the rear passenger window lowered halfway. One of Damien's associates sat inside. His expression remained calm and respectful. "Miss Hale." I stopped walking. "Can I help you?" Mr. Vescari asked me to deliver a message. Every instinct told me to keep moving. Instead, I stood perfectly still. "I am listening. He would like to ask you one question." He already asked several. The man almost smiled. "This one matters more." I folded my arms against the cold. "Then ask it." He looked directly into my eyes. "Did your grandmother ever mention the village of Valdemora?" The name struck me like an unexpected memory. I had heard it exactly once. I was about 9 years old. My grandmother had whispered it in her sleep after a fever. The next morning she refused to discuss it. "Why are you asking?" I said carefully. "Because Mr. Vescari believes your grandmother came from there." My heartbeat quickened. How could he possibly know that? He did not say. The sedan remained motionless. Nobody pressured me. Nobody opened a door. It felt less like an invitation than a conversation balanced on invisible lines. I reached into my pocket and wrapped my fingers around the coin. "Tell Mr. Vescari my grandmother rarely spoke about her childhood." "Is that your answer?" "It is the only one I have." The associate nodded politely. "Very well." The window rose without another word. The sedan pulled away smoothly and disappeared around the corner. I stood alone beneath the rain for several seconds before realizing something else. He had never asked where I lived. Yet they had found me only 2 blocks from my restaurant after midnight. The thought should have frightened me. Instead, it made my grandmother's final weeks replay inside my mind. She had spent hours sorting old photographs. She had burned several letters in our fireplace. She had even locked the jewelry box for the first time in my life. Back then, I assumed grief had changed her habits. Standing in the rain, I wondered if she had been protecting something instead. I drove home through nearly empty streets, unable to shake that feeling. My apartment greeted me with familiar silence. The small kitchen still held the scent of yesterday's coffee. I changed into comfortable clothes and pulled the wooden jewelry box from the top shelf of my closet. Dust covered the lid. My fingers hesitated before lifting it open. Inside rested faded photographs, a silver rosary, several handwritten recipes, and a folded piece of yellowed fabric. Beneath everything else lay the carved symbol I remembered so well. I placed Damien's coin beside it. They fit together with perfect precision, like 2 halves of the same forgotten story. Then I noticed something I had somehow missed for years. Tucked beneath the fabric was a small envelope with my name written across the front in my grandmother's careful handwriting. The paper had never been opened. My hands refused to move for several seconds. The envelope looked ordinary, yet it carried the weight of every unanswered question from my childhood. My grandmother's handwriting curved gently across the front. Just 3 words. For Corinne. Alone. I sat at my small kitchen table while rain whispered against the window. The clock on the microwave read 12:18 in the morning. The apartment felt smaller than usual, almost as though the walls had leaned closer to hear what waited inside that envelope. I carefully broke the faded seal. The paper crackled softly beneath my fingertips. A single folded letter slipped into my lap. There was no photograph, no map, no explanation at first glance. Only one page filled with careful blue ink. I recognized every stroke immediately. My grandmother had always written slowly, as if every sentence deserved respect. I took a deep breath and began reading. My sweet Corinne, if you are opening this letter, someone has already found the old coin. My pulse jumped. I looked toward the matching coin resting beside the jewelry box. Suddenly, it no longer seemed like an old keepsake. It felt like a message sent across decades. I continued reading. If that day arrives, do not panic. Listen before you judge. Not every powerful man is your enemy. Not every secret deserves fear. I frowned. Those words sounded impossible after everything that had happened that evening. The next sentence stopped me completely. If the man who carries the matching coin speaks our village dialect without hesitation, hear him out. My heartbeat echoed inside the silent apartment. She had known. Somehow she had expected this exact moment. I read faster now, searching for answers that refused to come quickly enough. The people of Valdemora survived because some families protected others without asking for recognition. Debts of honor sometimes live longer than the people who created them. My grandmother had never believed in coincidence. Neither had I. Not anymore. I reached the bottom of the page. One final paragraph remained. You may hear stories about the Vescari family. Some will be true. Many will not. Remember only this. I trusted one of them with my life, and one of them trusted me with theirs. I lowered the letter slowly. The room felt strangely quiet. Everything I believed about my grandmother suddenly seemed incomplete. She had never mentioned the Vescari name. Not once. Yet she had written it as though I should already understand. Sleep never came. I spent another hour searching through the jewelry box. Hidden beneath the false bottom, I discovered something else. A faded black and white photograph. For young people stood beside an old stone church. One woman smiled at the camera. Even at first glance, I recognized my grandmother. She looked barely 20. Beside her stood a tall young man wearing a simple suit. His sharp features looked hauntingly familiar. I compared the photograph with the memory of Damien's face. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. The eyes were different. The decades were different. But the family resemblance remained unmistakable. I turned the photograph over. A date had been written in faded ink. September 1984. Beneath it appeared 4 names. My grandmother's name came first. Another belonged to a priest. The third had faded beyond recognition. The final name remained perfectly clear. Matteo Vescari. I whispered it aloud. The apartment suddenly felt colder. Morning arrived without rest. I dressed for work, carrying more questions than answers. Before leaving, I slipped the letter, the photograph, and the coin into my shoulder bag. Something told me I should keep them close. The city looked washed clean after the night's rain. Sunlight reflected from puddles along the sidewalks. Ordinary people hurried toward offices, coffee shops, and subway stations. Everything appeared normal. Only my world had changed. When I reached Bella Vista Trattoria, Tessa greeted me with a tired smile. Please tell me today is going to be boring. I almost laughed. I would like that very much. Before either of us could say another word, my manager hurried across the dining room, holding a small cream-colored envelope. His expression carried equal parts confusion and nervousness. Corinne, he said carefully, this was delivered for you 10 minutes ago. There was no stamp, no mailing address, only my name written across the front in elegant handwriting. I opened it immediately. Inside rested a single card. One sentence had been written in dark blue ink. Bring the photograph to St. Raphael Church at 6 o'clock tonight if you want the truth. At the bottom appeared no signature. There was only the same carved symbol from the 2 matching coins. I tried to convince myself not to go. Every sensible thought argued against meeting a stranger who somehow knew my family's secrets. Yet every answer I wanted pointed towards St. Raphael Church. The card remained folded inside my pocket all afternoon. Each time I touched it, I heard my grandmother's voice reminding me that fear and wisdom were never the same thing. My shift dragged by in slow motion. Plates came and went. Customers smiled, complained, laughed, and left generous tips. I remembered almost none of them. Tessa noticed before lunch was over. You have checked the clock at least 20 times, she said. You are waiting for something. I forced a smile that fooled neither of us. Maybe I am waiting for my life to make sense again. She laughed softly, then stopped when she realized I was serious. Corinne, whatever happened after work yesterday, promise me you are not facing it alone. I appreciated her concern more than she knew. I promise I will be careful. That was the closest thing to honesty I could offer. At 5:30, I changed into a navy sweater and dark jeans before leaving through the employee entrance. The church stood nearly 15 minutes away on foot. The evening air carried the scent of wet pavement and blooming trees. Bells echoed somewhere across the neighborhood, calm and steady. St. Raphael Church looked older than every building surrounding it. Red brick walls held decades of rain and sunlight. Tall stained glass windows reflected the fading sky in shades of blue and gold. The front door stood open. I stepped inside slowly. Candles flickered beneath painted saints. Their warm light softened the quiet sanctuary. A handful of people prayed silently in scattered pews. Everything felt peaceful, too peaceful for the questions crowding my mind. I looked around but saw nobody waiting for me. Then an elderly priest emerged from a side hallway carrying several books. He paused the moment he saw me. His eyes settled on the photograph peeking from my shoulder bag. "You must be Corinne Hale," he said gently. I nodded before remembering I had never introduced myself. "How do you know my name?" His smile carried the calm confidence of someone who had already expected that question. "Because your grandmother asked me to remember it many years ago." My breath caught. "You knew her?" "Very well." He motioned toward a wooden bench near the front. "Please sit." I obeyed without another word. He lowered himself beside me with surprising ease. "My name is Father Benedict," he said. "I baptized 3 generations of one family and protected another." I carefully removed the photograph and placed it between us. "Can you explain this?" He studied the faded faces with unmistakable affection. "This was taken the week before your grandmother sailed to America." His finger rested lightly above the young man beside her. "And this is Matteo Vescari." The name sounded heavier inside the church than it had inside my apartment. Was he Damien's father? Father Benedict nodded slowly. "Yes." My heart began racing again. My grandmother wrote that she trusted him. She did. Why? The priest looked toward the stained glass above the altar before answering. "Because trust was earned one difficult choice at a time." His words carried no drama, only quiet certainty. Your grandmother and Matteo grew up in the same village. Their families looked after one another for decades. I leaned closer. "Then why did she never tell me?" He sighed softly. "Some promises are easier to keep than to explain." Before I could ask another question, the heavy wooden doors behind us opened. Slow footsteps echoed across the stone floor. I turned instinctively. Damien Vescari walked into the church alone. No entourage, no expensive overcoat despite the cool evening. He approached without hurry and stopped several feet away. Father Benedict smiled warmly. "You are late," he said. Damien inclined his head respectfully. "Traffic." The priest chuckled quietly. That excuse worked better 30 years ago. I stared between them in disbelief. They clearly knew each other well. Damien finally looked at me. His expression remained composed, but the distance I had seen inside the restaurant was gone. "Thank you for coming," he said. I folded my arms. "You still owe me several explanations." "I know." He glanced toward the photograph resting beside Father Benedict. "May I?" After a brief hesitation, I handed it to him. He held it with extraordinary care, almost like something fragile enough to disappear. His thumb brushed lightly across the faded image of Matteo. "My father carried a copy of this photograph until the day he died," Damien said quietly. "I never imagined I would see the original." A silence settled between us. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and removed another old photograph. He placed it beside mine. The 2 pictures matched perfectly except for one detail. On the back of his copy, someone had written a single sentence in careful blue ink. "One day our children will know the truth." I read the sentence twice before I trusted my own eyes. The handwriting looked almost identical to my grandmother's. The ink had faded, but the promise had survived. Father Benedict watched my expression without interrupting. He understood that some discoveries needed silence before questions. Damien carefully returned both photographs to the wooden bench between us. His movements remained steady, yet something behind his eyes had changed. The distance was gone. In its place rested something quieter, something that looked remarkably like relief. "My father searched for your grandmother for years," Damien said. His voice echoed softly beneath the church ceiling. He believed she had disappeared forever after leaving Sicily. I looked toward Father Benedict. "Why did she leave?" The priest folded his hands. "Because she wanted a different future for the family she hoped to build." Was she running from something? He smiled gently. She was running toward something. I frowned. That sounds like one of her answers. Perhaps that is where she learned it. Damien almost smiled. It was the first genuine expression I had seen from him. Small, brief, human. I noticed it disappeared almost immediately. There is something you deserve to know, he said. Your grandmother never owed my family anything. Then why did she protect your father? Because compassion was simply who she was. Father Benedict nodded. Matteo became dangerously ill during one harsh winter. The nearest doctor lived several miles away. Your grandmother walked through freezing rain to bring help. She stayed beside him for 3 days. I tried to picture the young woman from the photograph. She had always been my grandmother. Gentle, patient, strong. I had never imagined her as someone willing to cross mountains for another family. She never told me any of this. I whispered. Damien looked toward the stained glass windows. Colors reflected softly across the polished floor. Neither did my father. I learned most of it after he passed away. His journals mentioned her often. My curiosity grew stronger than my hesitation. Then why were you searching for us? He hesitated before answering. Because gratitude should never disappear with one generation. His words caught me off guard. I had expected power, control, mystery. I had not expected humility. Father Benedict slowly stood and walked toward a small cabinet near the altar. He unlocked one drawer and returned carrying a weathered leather notebook. He placed it into my hands. Your grandmother asked me to keep this safe. She said only one person should receive it. You. I looked at the worn cover. My fingers trembled slightly. Another journal? A record? Father Benedict corrected softly. Not of events. Of promises. Damien stepped back without touching it. I have never read it. You could have. I gave Father Benedict my word. Somehow that answer mattered more than I expected. Powerful people often took whatever they wanted. Damien had chosen restraint instead. I carefully opened the notebook. The first several pages contained recipes written beside family celebrations. Birthdays, weddings, holidays. Then the entries changed. Each page listed names, dates, villages. Beside every name appeared a short note describing an act of kindness received or given. None involved money. Every one involved people helping one another through difficult moments. I slowly realized what I was holding. It was not a ledger of debts. It was a history of gratitude. Near the center of the notebook, I found 2 familiar names written beside each other. Elena Russo, Matteo Vescari. Beneath them, my grandmother had written one sentence. Honor is measured by the lives we lift, never the power we hold. Damien quietly closed his eyes for a brief moment. My father quoted that sentence throughout my childhood. I never knew where it came from. I looked at him differently now. The expensive suit disappeared. The carefully controlled expression disappeared. I saw someone carrying expectations that had begun long before he was born. Church bells rang above us, filling the sanctuary with deep, peaceful notes. The sound lingered in the air before fading into silence. Father Benedict checked the old clock near the entrance. I must prepare for evening service. He smiled warmly at both of us. The rest belongs to you. The priest quietly walked away, leaving us alone beneath the colored light. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally, I slipped the notebook into my bag beside the photographs. I still do not understand why hearing one Sicilian phrase changed everything. Damien looked directly at me. His expression became thoughtful again. Because it was not merely an insult. It was a phrase spoken only inside one tiny valley. My father said your grandmother invented it as a joke when they were children. I stared at him in disbelief. You are telling me my life changed because I repeated my grandmother's favorite joke? A quiet laugh escaped him before he could stop it. It surprised both of us. In a way, he admitted. Yes. Then his smile slowly faded as footsteps echoed outside the church doors. Damien turned toward the entrance. His attention sharpened instantly, not with fear, but with careful awareness. A woman in an elegant gray coat stood just beyond the doorway, watching us from the fading evening light with an unreadable expression. Damien's voice became almost a whisper. She should not be here. I followed Damien's gaze toward the entrance without understanding why the air suddenly felt heavier. The woman remained perfectly still beneath the stone archway. She looked to be in her early 50s. Silver streaks ran through her dark hair with effortless elegance. Her charcoal coat fit with quiet precision. She did not look intimidating. She looked accustomed to being obeyed. The evening light framed her face while she watched us with remarkable patience. Damien did not move. Neither did I. Father Benedict paused halfway across the sanctuary after noticing our silence. He turned toward the doorway and offered the woman a polite nod. "Good evening, Vivian," he said warmly. She returned the greeting with a respectful smile. "Father Benedict." Her voice carried confidence without sharpness. Then her attention shifted toward me. "So you are Corinne Hale." Hearing my name from another stranger should have unsettled me. Instead, I found myself growing strangely calm. Perhaps too many impossible things had already happened that week. "Yes," I answered carefully. She inclined her head. "It is an honor to finally meet you." Finally. That single word caught my attention immediately. "You were expecting me." She looked briefly toward Damien before answering. "For much longer than you realize." I folded my arms instinctively. I feel like everyone knows parts of my life except me. A faint expression of sympathy crossed her face. "That is a fair observation." Damien finally stepped forward. "Vivian, this is not the place." She met his eyes calmly. "No, but it is the right time." Their exchange felt familiar, almost practiced. They clearly trusted one another enough to disagree without hostility. I noticed that detail immediately. Vivian reached into her handbag and removed a small leather folder. She held it toward me instead of Damien. "Your grandmother asked me to keep this until the day we found you." I hesitated. Damien did not speak. Father Benedict gave the slightest encouraging nod. I accepted the folder slowly. Inside rested several brittle papers and one carefully folded map. The first page displayed a handwritten family tree. My eyes traveled across unfamiliar names until they reached my grandmother. Beneath her name, someone had written another sentence. "Guardian of the Valley Ledger." I looked up immediately. "What does that mean?" Vivian answered before anyone else could. "Your grandmother protected something more valuable than money." "The notebook?" I asked. She shook her head gently. "The notebook records kindness. The real legacy records trust." I frowned. I still do not understand. Very few people do. Damien quietly exhaled beside me. "Vivian." She acknowledged him with another glance. "She deserves honesty." He nodded once. "She does." Vivian carefully unfolded the map across one of the wooden pews. It showed an old Sicilian valley surrounded by handwritten notes and faded landmarks. A tiny chapel had been circled in blue ink. "Valdemora," she said softly. "Most people have never heard its name." My fingers traced the outline of the valley. "My grandmother never showed me this, because she hoped you would never need it." Father Benedict returned to join us. History has a habit of returning when people believe it has disappeared. Vivian smiled sadly. "Unfortunately, Father, that has always been true." I looked from one face to another. Every answer uncovered another mystery. "Why now?" I asked. "Why after all these years?" Damien answered this time. "Because someone else has started asking the same questions." His tone remained calm, but I recognized the caution beneath it. "Who?" He hesitated. Vivian answered quietly. "People searching for power instead of gratitude." I stared at the old notebook inside my shoulder bag. "You think they want this?" "No," Vivian replied. "They want what it leads to." My confusion only deepened. "And what does it lead to?" She looked directly into my eyes. "Families who trusted one another before wealth divided them." Church bells echoed again outside, filling the silence between us. Their gentle sound somehow made the conversation feel even more serious. Damien folded the map with careful precision before handing it back to me. "Everything you own now belongs to your family's story," he said. "Keep it somewhere safe." I almost laughed from pure disbelief. Safe has become a very relative word. To my surprise, the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "You are adapting faster than I expected." "I'm not sure that is a compliment." "It is." Before I could respond, Vivian glanced toward the church windows. Her expression changed almost imperceptibly. Calm remained, but alertness quietly settled beneath it. She lowered her voice. "We should leave separately." I looked outside through the stained glass. Parked across the street sat an unfamiliar dark sedan. Nothing about it appeared unusual except one detail. It had remained in exactly the same spot since I arrived. Damien noticed it as well. He spoke without taking his eyes off the street. "Someone else knows the search is over." I looked across the street again, hoping the sedan had disappeared. It had not. The engine remained off. The headlights stayed dark. Yet something about its stillness felt deliberate. Father Benedict quietly closed the church doors behind us. The heavy would soften the outside noise, but it did nothing to ease the tension inside my chest. Vivian adjusted the strap of her handbag with calm precision. "Do not assume they came for you," she said. Damien answered before I could. "They came because she found us." His words settled heavily between us. I slipped the notebook deeper into my shoulder bag. It suddenly felt far more valuable than paper and ink. "What happens now?" I asked. Damien met my eyes without hesitation. "Now you keep living your normal life." I almost laughed. "You and I have very different definitions of normal." A faint smile crossed his face again. "Fair point." Vivian stepped closer. "Routine keeps people invisible. Panic makes them noticeable." I nodded slowly, remembering my grandmother's favorite advice. Never let fear make your decisions. She had repeated those words every time life became uncertain. I wondered how often she had followed them herself. Damien looked toward the church entrance once more. "I will leave first. Wait 2 minutes before you walk outside." I frowned. "You think someone is watching?" "I think someone is curious." His careful choice of words told me more than a dramatic warning ever could. He refused to exaggerate danger. That made me trust him more than I expected. Without another word, Damien opened the church door and stepped into the evening. I watched through the stained glass as he crossed the sidewalk with steady confidence. The dark sedan remained parked exactly where it had been. No doors opened. Nobody approached him. Damien disappeared around the corner, and the street became quiet again. Vivian checked her watch. 1 more minute. I shifted the strap on my shoulder. "You seem surprisingly calm." She smiled gently. "Experience often looks like calm from the outside." Father Benedict chuckled softly. That is one way to describe Vivian. The church bell rang once above us. Vivian nodded toward the entrance. "You may go now." I thanked them both before stepping outside. Cool evening air brushed across my face. The sedan still waited across the street. I resisted the urge to stare. Instead, I walked toward the subway station with measured steps. Halfway down the block, I noticed the sedan easing away from the curb. It did not accelerate. It simply entered traffic and continued in the opposite direction. Relief washed over me before doubt immediately followed. Had they truly been watching me? Or had I imagined the entire connection? By the time I reached my apartment, exhaustion settled into every muscle. I locked the door, placed the notebook inside my kitchen cabinet, and tucked the photographs beneath a stack of cookbooks. My grandmother always believed ordinary places hid extraordinary things best. I finally understood why. Sleep arrived in scattered pieces that night. Every dream carried fragments of old churches, mountain villages, and faces I had never met. Morning sunlight pulled me awake far too soon. I brewed coffee and reread my grandmother's letter while toast cooled beside the sink. One sentence refused to leave my mind. "Not every powerful man is your enemy." I folded the letter carefully and headed to work. Bella Vista Trattoria looked exactly as it always had. The smell of fresh bread drifted through the dining room. Chef Lorenzo argued playfully with the pastry chef. Tessa waved from the espresso machine. For a brief moment, I almost believed the past 2 days had never happened. Then I reached my locker in the employee room. Resting neatly on top of my folded apron sat a small brown paper bag. My name appeared across the front in elegant handwriting I immediately recognized. Inside waited a warm almond pastry from a bakery nearly 40 minutes away, the same bakery my grandmother used to visit every birthday without fail. Beneath it rested a handwritten note. "Your grandmother said these should never be eaten alone. If you are willing, I would like to hear one story about her. No secrets, just memories. Damien." I read the note twice before smiling despite myself. For the first time since this impossible journey had begun, he was not asking about hidden histories, forgotten villages, or old promises. He was simply asking about the woman we had both loved in different ways. Then Tessa stepped into the room carrying her phone, her expression suddenly serious. "Corinne," she said quietly, "someone has been sitting outside the restaurant since sunrise asking whether you are working today." A strange calm settled over me instead of panic. Maybe that was what happened when surprises arrived too often. Fear eventually grew tired of running. I looked at Tessa and carefully folded Damien's note back into the paper bag. "Did the person leave a name?" I asked. She shook her head. "No. The host said he has been sitting in a gray sedan across the street since just after sunrise." My heartbeat slowed instead of racing. That surprised me more than anything else. Did he ask for me directly? Only once. Then he ordered coffee from the cafe next door and never moved. I glanced through the employee room window toward the front of the restaurant. From that angle, I could barely see the opposite sidewalk. A gray sedan rested beside the curb exactly where Tessa had described. It looked ordinary enough to disappear into city traffic. That almost made it more unsettling. Chef Lorenzo called everyone together for the morning meeting. Daily specials, reservations, private events. I heard every word without remembering any of them. My attention kept drifting toward the street outside. After the meeting ended, I tied on my apron and slipped Damien's note into my pocket beside my grandmother's letter. Somehow they belonged together. One carried the past. The other reached toward the future. Lunch service began quietly. Office workers filled the dining room with conversations about deadlines and weekend plans. Everything appeared wonderfully ordinary. Around noon, I finally gathered enough courage to glance outside again. The gray sedan remained parked exactly where it had been. The driver never stepped out. He never looked inside the restaurant. He simply waited. Waiting can be louder than action. My grandmother used to say that patience revealed intention. Around 1 o'clock, the front door opened. I instinctively looked up, expecting another customer. Instead, I saw Vivian. She wore a simple cream-colored coat instead of yesterday's charcoal one. Without the formal clothing, she looked less intimidating and more approachable. She smiled warmly when she noticed me. "May I have lunch?" she asked. "Of course," I answered. "Table for one." "Actually, table for two." I frowned slightly. "Someone is joining you." "I hope so." She glanced meaningfully toward me. My manager immediately seated her near the front window. A few minutes later, he asked me to handle the table. As I approached with water glasses, Vivian thanked me as though we had never met before. "Busy day?" she asked casually. "Busier than usual." She noticed the brief glance I cast toward the gray sedan outside. "He is still there." I nodded almost imperceptibly. "Since sunrise." Vivian remained perfectly composed. "Then he is not impatient." "Should that comfort me?" She smiled gently. "More than the alternative." I placed a menu in front of her. "Do you know who he is?" "No." "Neither do I." Her answer sounded completely sincere. Before I could ask another question, the restaurant door opened again. Damien walked inside wearing a dark navy jacket instead of yesterday's tailored suit. Without the formal attire, he looked less like an untouchable businessman and more like someone trying very hard not to attract attention. He walked directly to Vivian's table. "Am I late?" he asked. "Only by 2 minutes," she replied. He looked toward me with quiet amusement. "Apparently, I am improving." I could not stop myself from smiling. "That depends on who is grading you." Vivian laughed softly. It was the first truly relaxed moment any of us had shared. I handed Damien a menu, though I doubted he needed one. "The almond pastry was thoughtful," I said quietly. "She always bought two," he replied. "My father wrote that she refused to eat the first bite alone." I felt my throat tighten unexpectedly. "She did the same with me." He nodded once, almost as if another missing piece had settled into place. Just then my manager called me toward another table. I excused myself and crossed the dining room. While refilling iced tea for another customer, I happened to glance outside again. The gray sedan was gone. Relief washed over me for exactly 3 seconds. Then a delivery driver hurried through the front entrance carrying a small package addressed to me. There was no return address, only my name written in neat block letters. My manager handed it over with a puzzled expression. "Looks personal." I thanked him and carefully opened the box beside the service station. Inside rested a single old brass key attached to a weathered leather tag. 3 words had been burned into the leather with careful precision. Valdemora. Library. Cellar. The brass key felt unexpectedly heavy in my palm. It looked ordinary, yet every person standing near me reacted as though they recognized its importance. Damien did not reach for it. Vivian did not ask to examine it. They simply looked at one another with quiet understanding. I slipped the key back into its small box and lowered my voice. "Someone wants me to find whatever this opens." Damien nodded slowly. "Or someone wants to know whether you already understand what it opens." That difference lingered in my mind. One possibility offered guidance. The other sounded like a test. Vivian folded her napkin neatly beside her untouched lunch. "The Library of Valdemora no longer appears on modern maps. Most people believe it disappeared decades ago." I frowned. Then why send me the key now? Because memories disappear more slowly than buildings, she answered. Before I could ask another question, my manager called my name from across the dining room. A large reservation had just arrived. Reality returned all at once. I tucked the key into my apron pocket and returned to work. The afternoon passed in a blur of coffee refills, pasta orders, birthday desserts, and polite conversations. Yet every ordinary task felt strangely comforting. Carrying plates reminded me that not everything in my life had changed. Between tables, I occasionally caught Damien watching the dining room instead of his meal. He never interrupted me. He never demanded attention. He simply observed everything with patient awareness. As lunch ended, Vivian stood first. She thanked me for the service exactly like any other customer. Then she quietly said, "Do not keep the key where anyone would expect." I nodded. "I will remember." Damien remained seated another moment. He placed enough cash on the table to cover lunch and an unnecessarily generous tip. Before leaving, he looked at me with the same calm expression I had first seen across the restaurant. "Do you finish at 7?" he asked. I hesitated. "Usually. May I walk you home?" The question surprised me because it sounded exactly like that. A question, not an instruction, not an expectation. I smiled politely. "I appreciate the offer, but I think I need an evening with my own thoughts." He accepted the answer without disappointment. "Fair enough." He stood, buttoned his jacket, and started toward the door. Just before stepping outside, he turned back. "Corinne." "Yes. If you notice anything unusual tonight, call this number before making any assumptions." He handed me a simple business card. There was no company logo, only his name and one telephone number. I slipped it into my pocket beside the key. "Thank you." He inclined his head and left without another word. Tessa appeared beside me almost immediately. "You realize he asked if he could walk you home?" I noticed. "You said no." "I did." She stared at me in disbelief before laughing. "You might be the only woman in Manhattan who has ever told that man no without sounding afraid." I laughed with her, though part of me wondered whether courage and confusion sometimes looked exactly the same. My shift finally ended just after 7:15. Evening sunlight painted the sidewalks with long golden shadows. I decided to walk instead of taking the subway. Fresh air usually helped me think. Halfway home, I stopped at the small neighborhood bakery where my grandmother and I used to buy fresh bread every Saturday morning. Mrs. Alvarez still worked behind the counter after all these years. She smiled warmly when she saw me. "You look exactly like your grandmother when she was thinking too hard," she teased. I laughed softly. Was it that obvious? Only to people who loved her. She wrapped a loaf of warm bread in brown paper before leaning closer. "Someone stopped by earlier asking about you." My smile faded. "Did you know them?" She shook her head. "Very polite. Asked whether your grandmother ever spoke about Sicily." My pulse quickened. "What did you tell them?" "Exactly what she told me years ago." Mrs. Alvarez smiled proudly. "Some family stories belong to the family." Relief washed through me. "Thank you." She gently squeezed my hand across the counter. "Your grandmother helped many people. It seems they have not forgotten." I carried the warm bread home beneath a sky turning deep blue. The familiar scent reminded me of childhood evenings spent around a tiny kitchen table. When I reached my apartment building, something immediately felt different. My mailbox stood slightly open. I was certain I had locked it that morning. Inside waited no bills, no advertisements, and no letters. Only a folded piece of cream-colored paper. I unfolded it carefully. There was no greeting, no signature, just one sentence typed in perfect black letters. "The key opens more than a door, and someone inside your grandmother's circle has been lying for 30 years. I read the sentence in the letter 3 times before I could accept what it implied. Someone had been lying for 30 years. The words felt heavier than anything I had encountered so far. I sat on the edge of my bed in complete silence, holding the paper as if it might change if I blinked too hard. My apartment had never felt so quiet. Even the city outside seemed distant, like it was holding its breath with me. I placed the letter on the table beside the brass key and Damien's card. All 3 objects now felt connected in a way I could not explain. My grandmother had once told me that truth rarely arrived all at once. It came in pieces, like scattered glass you only understand after you step on it. I had never understood that until now. I checked the lock on my door twice before sitting down again. The idea that someone inside my grandmother's circle had lied for decades changed everything I thought I knew about her world. I reached for my phone and hesitated. Damien's number was still saved from the card he gave me. I stared at it for nearly 5 minutes before deciding not to call. Instead, I opened my laptop and searched for anything related to Valdemora. The results were almost empty. A few outdated travel blogs. One academic mention of an abandoned Sicilian valley. Nothing useful. That silence online felt intentional, as if the place itself resisted being remembered. I closed the laptop and leaned back, exhausted by information that refused to become clarity. A sudden knock at the door made me freeze. It was not loud, but it carried a certainty that made my chest tighten. I moved slowly, peeking through the small peephole. Damien stood outside alone, hands relaxed, expression calm but focused. I opened the door without thinking too long. He did not step inside immediately. He simply looked at me for a moment, as if confirming something. "I should not be here this late," he said quietly. "Then why are you?" I replied. He held up a small folded document. "Because someone tried to intercept this before it reached you." I took it carefully, my fingers brushing his for a brief second. The paper felt colder than it should have. I stepped aside and let him in. He did not comment on the apartment. He simply looked at the objects on my table. The letter, the key, and his card all placed together. "You read it," he said. I nodded. Someone lied for 30 years. He exhaled slowly, as if he had expected that line. "That is only part of it." I crossed my arms. "Then tell me the rest." He hesitated, then sat across from me. For the first time, he looked slightly less controlled. Not weak, just burdened. "The Vescari family did not leave Valdemora willingly," he said. I waited, but he did not continue immediately. "There was a dispute over something stored in that library," he added. "Something your grandmother helped protect." I felt my stomach tighten. Protect from who? Damien met my eyes directly. From people who believed knowledge should be controlled instead of shared. I stood up and paced slowly near the window. "That sounds like a political problem." "It became one," he answered. "But it started as something personal." I turned back toward him. "You are still not telling me everything." He nodded once. "Because I am still not sure who can be trusted with all of it." The honesty in his voice made me pause. It was not avoidance. It was caution shaped by experience. I returned to the table and sat down again. "Why come here yourself?" I asked. "You could have sent someone." Damien looked at the letter in my hand. "Because this involves your grandmother directly." The words settled in slowly. I felt something shift inside me. "And because," he added, "whoever sent you that message knows exactly where you live." A cold silence filled the room. I looked at him carefully. "Are you telling me I am in danger?" He shook his head slightly. "I am telling you that someone is watching the timing of everything very closely." I reached for the brass key without thinking. It felt heavier than before. "Then what do we do now?" Damien stood and moved toward the window. He looked out into the street for a long moment before answering. "Now we stop waiting for them to decide the next move." He turned back toward me. "We go to Valdemora." I did not sleep that night. The idea of Valdemora kept circling in my mind like something alive that refused to settle. Damien left my apartment just before midnight, without saying anything unnecessary. He simply reminded me to keep the key close and avoid discussing it with anyone who did not already know the story. His warning should have made me more afraid. Instead, it made everything feel more real. By morning, I had already decided I would go with him. Not because I trusted everything he said, but because ignorance felt more dangerous than uncertainty. I arrived at Bella Vista earlier than usual. The restaurant was still quiet, chairs neatly arranged, floors freshly polished. Tessa noticed my expression immediately. "You look like you did not sleep at all," she said. I forced a small smile. "I had a long night." She leaned closer. "Is it him again?" I paused before answering. "It is not that simple." She studied me carefully, then nodded as if she already accepted she would not get the full truth. A few minutes later, my manager handed me a sealed envelope. No explanation. No sender name. Just my name written in precise handwriting. My stomach tightened before I even opened it. Inside was a printed boarding confirmation for a flight leaving New York that evening. Destination, Palermo, Sicily. Attached beneath it was a short note. "If you are reading this, I assume you chose to learn the truth instead of avoiding it. I will meet you at the airport. Damien." My hands went cold. I looked at the departure time again to confirm it was real. It was in less than 12 hours. I turned toward Tessa without fully processing what I was saying. "I need to take a leave today." She blinked. A leave. I nodded slowly, possibly longer than expected. She did not ask for details this time. Instead, she exhaled and gave me a look that mixed concern and acceptance. Just promise me you are not disappearing into something dangerous. I hesitated. I am not disappearing. Then what are you doing? I looked down at the boarding pass still in my hand. I am trying to understand where I came from. The rest of my shift passed like a dream I could not fully wake up from. Every table, every order, every smile from customers felt distant. My body moved automatically while my thoughts stayed somewhere far away, between letters, keys, and forgotten villages. By late afternoon, I returned home to pack. I chose a small suitcase, the same one I used for short trips to visit family years ago. Everything I needed fit easily, as if I was not meant to bring much. I placed the brass key carefully inside a secure pocket. Then I added the letter, the notebook from Father Benedict, and the photograph I had discovered days earlier. Each item felt like a fragment of a story that was finally pulling itself together. When I finished packing, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the suitcase. Leaving New York had always been something I imagined as temporary. This felt different. Not an escape. A direction. My phone buzzed just before 5. An unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. "You are leaving soon," Damien said on the other end. His voice was calm, but focused. "Yes," I replied. "You will not be alone at the airport," he said. I tightened my grip on the phone. "That was not part of the plan. Plans change when people start watching them," he answered. I walked toward the window. The street outside looked normal, people moving through their usual routines without awareness of anything unusual. "Is someone watching me right now?" I asked quietly. There was a brief pause. "Not directly," he said, "but they are aware of movement around you." I closed my eyes for a moment. "That does not make me feel better." "It was not meant to," he replied. I exhaled slowly. "What happens when I land in Sicily?" "Then the real conversation begins," he said. His tone softened slightly. "Do not bring anything unnecessary. Only what you already have." "And what if I change my mind?" I asked. Another pause. "Then you stay in New York and spend your life wondering what the truth was." The honesty of that answer stayed with me long after the call ended. Evening arrived faster than expected. The city outside turned gold and then slowly faded into deep blue. I locked my apartment, checked my bag twice, and stepped into the hallway. Every step toward the elevator felt heavier than the last. At the airport, everything looked ordinary. Travelers rushing to gates, announcements echoing through wide terminals, coffee cups in hand. Yet nothing about my situation felt ordinary anymore. I stood near the check-in area holding my passport and boarding pass. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear alone, but from anticipation I could not fully name. Then I saw him. Damien stood near a column across the terminal, dressed simply in a dark jacket. No entourage, no visible security. Just him, waiting as if he had always known I would arrive. He looked up and met my eyes from a distance. No dramatic gesture, no urgency, only certainty. I walked toward him slowly, feeling every step more final than the last. When I reached him, he spoke first. "You came." I nodded. I had too many unanswered questions to stay. He accepted that without comment. After a moment, he handed me a second boarding pass. "Same flight, same destination. Then let us finish what your grandmother started," he said quietly. And for the first time, I believed that nothing about my life would ever remain the same again. The plane ride to Sicily felt longer than the flight time suggested. I barely slept, and every time I closed my eyes I saw fragments of letters, coins, and a valley that I had never actually seen. Damien sat beside me for most of the flight without forcing conversation. He only spoke when necessary, usually in short sentences that carried more meaning than explanations. At one point, I asked him how many times he had been back to Sicily in recent years. He looked out the window before answering. "Not as many as I should have," he said quietly. That was all. No further details. No emotional emphasis. Just truth delivered without decoration. As the plane began its descent, clouds broke apart and revealed a coastline that looked both beautiful and distant. The sea stretched endlessly under the afternoon light, and the land beneath it carried a quiet weight I could not explain. Damien noticed my expression. "First time in Sicily?" he asked. I nodded. "First time outside the United States like this." He did not comment further. Instead, he reached into his jacket and placed something into my hand. It was the brass key again, but now attached to a small leather strap with coordinates engraved into it. Valdemora is not a place you arrive at directly, he said. It is a place you have to find twice. I looked at him in confusion. That makes no sense. It will, he replied. We landed in Palermo just before sunset. The airport was smaller than I expected, filled with warm light and voices that moved faster than I could follow. Vivian was waiting near the exit, dressed differently again, this time in a simple black dress that made her look less like a business presence and more like someone returning home. She greeted Damien with a slight nod, then turned to me. You made the correct choice, she said. I did not answer immediately. I am not sure I had a choice. She smiled gently. Everyone believes that at first. Outside, a dark vehicle waited with the engine already running. No visible markings. No unnecessary attention. We drove out of the city within minutes, leaving behind coastal streets and crowded buildings. The landscape slowly changed as we moved inland. Roads became narrower. Buildings became fewer. Eventually, even the sound of traffic faded completely. Only wind and distant birds remained. I watched the scenery shift from the back seat, my fingers still resting around the brass key in my pocket. Damien sat beside me again during the drive. Vivian drove without speaking unless necessary. After nearly an hour, the road turned into a narrow path lined with stone walls covered in wild plants. The driver finally stopped near a small bridge made of old stone. Beyond it stood a hillside covered in olive trees. Vivian stepped out first. From here, we walk, she said. I looked around. There is nothing here. Damien closed the car door gently. That is the point. We followed a narrow trail that barely looked maintained. The air smelled different here. Cleaner. Older. Almost like time itself had slowed down. After several minutes of walking, I saw it. A structure partially hidden by trees and hillside. It was not large. It was not grand. But it carried a quiet presence that made everything else feel temporary. A stone building with a simple wooden door and no visible markings. Vivian stopped a few feet away. This is it, she said softly. I stared at it. This is the library. Damien nodded. What remains of it? My heartbeat slowed in a strange way. Not from fear, but from recognition I did not understand. I stepped closer to the door. The brass key in my pocket suddenly felt warm again, as if responding to something nearby. I pulled it out slowly. Damien watched without speaking. Vivian remained still. I inserted the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, as if it had been used recently despite its age. The door opened with a soft creak. Inside, there was no darkness. Sunlight filtered through narrow windows, illuminating rows of wooden shelves. Not empty, not abandoned. Books still remained, carefully preserved, organized in quiet order that suggested someone had never truly left. I took one step inside and stopped immediately. On the nearest table rested a single framed photograph. My grandmother stood in the center of it, older than the image I had seen before, but unmistakably the same person. Beside her stood a younger Damien, and behind them both stood people I did not recognize. The photograph had a handwritten caption beneath it. The keepers return what the world forgets. I turned toward Damien slowly. You knew this was here. He shook his head once. I knew it existed, but I did not know it was still waiting. Vivian stepped closer to the doorway. It was never abandoned, she said quietly. Only hidden. I looked around the room again, feeling something shift inside me. The story was no longer just about lies or secrets. It was about preservation. About choices made long before I existed. I lowered my voice. So what happens now? Damien met my eyes with steady calm. Now you decide what part of this world survives the next generation. The wind moved through the open doorway behind me. Books lined the shelves like silent witnesses. And for the first time, I understood that my grandmother had not simply left me a mystery. She had left me a responsibility.